John and Gil, it is great to see you. Thank you very much for joining me here on the Voice of Law podcast. When I'm getting to know someone, I often start with this question. The question is, if you could sit down and have a chat with 5 people in the entire world and ask them about topics that fascinate you, who would you pick? And I want to hear your list at some point. I'm interested in the people who inspire you, but this is my list, okay? Elon Musk, Neil deGrasse Tyson, John Nosta, Gil Bashe, and there's a musician as well, Steve Vai. I like the guitar. So these are different disciplines, right? But what is common is that there's a brilliance, there's a genius that goes well beyond what many people would frankly be able to understand. And I think you need to be immersed in that world to see it, to get it. And once you start hanging around with people who think like you, who actually have the capacity to change the world, not only is that inspiring, but you also grow really fast. So the fact that I'm sitting here with you today, given that you're both on that list and you have been for a long time, is incredible and exciting. So thank you very much. Well, I'm going to... Yes.
It's a real honor. I mean, to be with you and John. I don't know about me, but certainly the two of you are amazing. So I'm looking forward to this.
I'm just getting hungry. So.
Fantastic. So I'm going to make the most of this opportunity and ask you some big questions today about the digital health revolution. You ready?
We're ready.
Okay. The pandemic has revealed the imperative of digital health in fulfilling basic human needs during periods of physical isolation. This has taken our conception of digital health from a want to a need, from a desire to a global imperative. We now see digital health as integral to the survival of people and communities in crisis and more. So my question is, what are some of the exciting technologies being used today to fulfill our healthcare needs, especially during this pandemic? And I might start with, if Gil could start off this discussion.
Thank you, Bianca. And John, I'm looking forward to your thoughts. I mean, John and I have a fondness for each other, and that fondness is so extensive that we can lovingly disagree with each other and still constantly want to hug each other. Not obviously social distancing, but at this point, so I'll send a virtual hug. But,
thank you, Gil.
I think embedded in your question is an inherent problem or challenge that, COVID-19 or the pandemic has ripped the veneer off of public health challenges we have faced for decades. And in fact, a lot of the technologies we're deploying right now, our system has sort of said, wait. So I first want to say, I'll answer the question about what technologies have come to play, but I think it's very important that we talk about the fact that these technologies are being deployed toward health problems of such great import that it's concerning. It's concerning that it's taken the pandemic to put the pedal on certain technologies that are now considered sort of like frontline health and medical services. And I want to talk about, on my part, just a few that I think have really sort of become commonplace today, but they existed years before, a decade before, if not more. COVID-19 became part of our vocabulary. So, I mean, one of the basics, of course, that everybody's talking about right now is the advent of telehealth services. And Bianca, I think that your discipline and your idea of this program is really inherent to why we haven't used more telehealth up until now. The greatest obstacles to digital health innovation is actually not the innovation itself. It's not the technology. It is the system of inertia, of status quo, and the legal system. So I do want to say that in the medical system, and I'd be interested in John's point of view here, that probably it is amazing. Who has a fax machine in their home today? I got rid of a fax machine ages ago. And yet the preferred, until COVID rolled in and across all of us, the preferred system of transferring data from one doctor to another, from one hospital to another, in life-threatening situations was in fact the secure fax machine. And who decided that? Well, actually not hospitals. It was decided by HIPAA regulations, listed the fax machine as the preferred route of transmission. So one, I want to say that COVID-19 is a great disruptor. And we think of disruption and we think of ruin, but in fact, I think it's about the great accelerator of technologies that should have been used quite some time ago. So some of those include now being able to transfer patient data in faster, equally secure ways, secure box, cloud-based technologies and so forth, which have been on the scene that are becoming more prominent because of COVID-19. That's one. Two, I mentioned earlier, telehealth. John has been a great advocate of telehealth. He's written about telehealth. Highly recommend listeners, go to Dr. Google, write in John Nosta and telehealth, read his pieces in Forbes, read his pieces on Psychology Today, just read his comments on Twitter about telehealth, and you'll get an encyclopedic knowledge of the history of telehealth and why it should have been used. That's number two. Number three, I think is the rise of patient portals. We've had patient portals in the United States. Unlike other parts of the world, we do not have an interoperable patient record system. Every system has its own little system. It's usually the underlying aspect of that is something like Forward Health or Epic or NextGen or Athena, these other systems. I think that we're seeing people, we use that, we're all people. We're patients sometimes, people always. I think people with health concerns are now recognizing that they need to keep their patient portal, their patient information up to date. And we're seeing actually increased use of our smartphones with government health agencies. I think a great example is Israel, which uses, I think, the Sheba medical system, Datos system, to stay in touch with people who are COVID-19 positive so they can see how they're doing and send help to their home as opposed to bring them into the medical center. So we're seeing smart technologies and actually what we'll call population management technologies on our phone. That's far more common and far more prevalent. I'm happy to see that. And of course, wearables. And John, I'm hoping John will dive in on that. His piece on the Apple Watch, there you go, man. His piece on the Apple Watch and its utility in health is a must read. And so I think those are the basics that I see have really put their foot on the gas pedal and accelerated forward, thankfully, because of COVID-19. John, I mean, what do you think?
Well, thank you for those kind words, number one. Number two, certainly—
Those are the last kind words you're going to get today. How's that?
Okay, that's good. That's good. So we talk about this triple inflection point. I've been sort of bantering it about now that we have the technological availability, we have process availability, and I think that's emerging as an interesting part of our discussion. The process, legal, regulatory, payers in that context in the U.S., that's extraordinary because prior to that, it just wasn't on the radar. And the third one for me is this whole notion of the moral imperative that it is the right thing to do. People used to talk about technology as an option, and as we shift it to more of an imperative. Couple quick points off the top of my head. We spend a lot of time talking about the devices. We spend a lot of time talking about the stuff. And as I said a long time ago, with wearables, data trumps the device. data trumps the device. The devices will become interchangeable. They won't become definitive. So I look forward to embracing data, whether it be cases in COVID, whether it be source tracing, or any aspect of our health and wellness. So to me, that's real interesting. Don't lose track of the fact that the data trumps the device. Now, the other thing which is really interesting to me is this emergence of telemedicine. Okay, telemedicine is good. It's important. People like it, you know. And there are a couple of points about that. When I speak to big audiences around the world, and they're often pharma people, I ask them, I said, how many people in this room have taken a telemedicine visit? And inevitably, it's about 5%. And that's really tragic, because these are the innovators who go to conferences on innovation and don't embrace innovation themselves. So I would call upon my partners in pharma to embrace technology and use it. And don't just look into the marketplace to implement it. Remember, fundamentally, culture crushes innovation. So I think the culture in our pharmaceutical communities, our academic settings, things like that need to be embraced. I want to see Kamala Harris do a telemedicine visit. And I think that's real important. Now,
how about the hip aspects of that?
And I picked her name because that's sort of top of the news. But, heaven help me if I picked a Republican and I mentioned that Republican, I would have been castigated for my profound political bias. So let's put that aside. Do you remember the days of the internet? Gil, remember those 8-page brochures that we used to do? That was the cornerstone of our business, that 8-page selling brochure. And then all of a sudden the .coms came around and everybody realized they needed a website. So what we did is we took the first page of the brochure and we put it on page 1 of the website. Then we took that center spread and we put it on page 2, maybe because they had to be together. It was a spread. The rep used pages 2 and 3 at the same time. So what we did is we took that paper visual aid and translated it to the internet. That's what we're doing now, okay? What we're doing is avoiding the emergence of the user experience. The user experience made the web what it is today. But today, we're taking a clinical visit, a visual engagement with the doctor, and putting it on a screen. What the heck is that? That is not the CX, right? The UX, the user experience, is fundamental. The CX, the clinical experience, needs to be translated in a more robust way. So for me, there's telemedicine and there's telemedicine 2.0. And telemedicine 2.0 will use linguistic analysis. We'll look at the time when I go to the orthopedist, and language will measure the number of times I say pain and detect things that are beneath the surface. But it will also monitor my voice. And it will pick up early signs of depression, anxiety, fear, Parkinson's, coronary artery disease. It's amazing. Our DNA is the template, right, upon which our health is built. Well, interestingly, our voice is the template through which all these physiologic things are mediated. It's a template that these symptoms and these issues ride upon. And that's what telemedicine is. It's mediated largely by voice and visual. So I think that we'll see the use of devices where we can use a stethoscope. And that stethoscope is what a patient uses to listen to heart sounds, to listen to murmurs, abnormalities, to take the EKG and superimpose it on the heart sound and create something that is almost exclusively the domain of the sophisticated cardiologist, called systolic time intervals. But when we do that at home on our couch, we can actually measure contractility. So here we have a person who has, congestive heart failure. And instead of waiting to put them on a scale and see that they gain 10 pounds because of edema, we can see early diagnostic signs. So for me, I think the magic here, number 1, is data, okay? Number 2 is telemedicine 2.0. And Gil, this is where you guys, you particularly and Finn, have such a great perspective on this, right? It's
John, what you said before, data trumps all, is first of all, is a big idea that needs to be captured. And I know that you've talked about this, and I was glad that you spoke about voice diagnosis and all this, which is really taking a look at how do we gain new ways to access these data. You know what concerns me? Not about your ideas, which are spot on. It concerns me, and Bianca, I think, has a voice here, is there's two things that always concern me with all of these spot on ideas. And I don't think you're often regarded as a futurist or a visionary. I actually think that that right now you're talking about like tomorrow. That's the vision. I mean, these things, there are companies out there that are doing these things right now, and obviously are generating the data. What disturbs me is two things, and I would appreciate Bianca's point of view and your point of view on this. One thing that disturbs me is that our systems, for the most part, obviously are not driven by outcomes; they're driven by dollars. And so people say, great idea, I can't monetize this to make money. And I want to touch on that for a second, because the reason telehealth really zoomed forward, I like your cup, telehealth zoomed forward was not because COVID-19 meant that patients weren't going into their doctor's office. It was because doctors, with all due respect to doctors, realized that unless they start to see patients somehow, some way, they were not going to be making money. And when the government said, we bless telehealth, we lower the bar, that's the Bianca said, we changed the law, at least for the time being, now it's permanently, policy, law, we lower the bar, and payers said, okay, we'll pay for telehealth. We'll pay for telehealth mental health, we'll pay for telehealth this, we'll pay for telehealth that. It's law meets economics creates opportunity. And I feel so inflamed about what you're saying, because I feel that the two obstacles are helping the power brokers, the payers, the health systems, providers understand how they can use these technologies to facilitate care and earn a living legally, and the fact that they could do so much good so much faster. I find that to be bewildering still, as someone who's in the trenches trying to improve people's care.
Well, it's tricky. So Topol's book was the Patient Will See You Now.
Yep.
So that to me is an interesting word, the patient. And we live in the world now of consumer centricity, of patient centricity. And as much as I go crazy about those terms, but I think the empowerment of the consumer is going to be an important driver here. And that's part of the third element. The social imperative is not only it's important, but we demand it. And that's why I think when a lot of people have never done a telemedicine visit. It's a hassle. A lot of people have never used an ATM machine. And that they just never did it, and they don't want to do it. And my goodness, when they realize how easy it is to use an ATM, they fall in love. And it was the same thing with people I know. They never did it. And then when they did it, they actually had a doctor's appointment from their bed. And they talked to the doctor and said, yeah, I feel like, and he calls in a prescription, and it's already set up in the system. So, I think that we will see this social push. But if I were a telemedicine company, I'd give away the first visit. I'd do something to provoke that trial, because without trial, you're never going to get there. That's why I had everybody at a pharmaceutical company have their first telemedicine visit mandated as part of their performance review. It's got to come from that kind of angle to drive it. So certainly the hegemony of the medical system is a problem. I think that MD will be replaced by more data as we see these powerful tools come to the forefront. But it's, there is an obstructionist reality to this. But I agree. I think the patients will be empowered when they recognize how darn easy it is, And look, there's a company that lets moms look in their kids' ears, right? And an otoscope is certainly not the domain of a parent. It's what your pediatrician uses to pull your ear and look in it, But that's commercially available. And for a mom who has a kid with chronic otitis media, lots of earaches. You know that syndrome. It's horrible. I got to stay home from work. I got to take my kid to the hospital, maybe the emergency room if the child is febrile. Here's an opportunity to look in the ear, use the smartphone, send the picture to the doctor, communicate with the physician. And interestingly, what's happening here is not the creation of a technological reality, but quite ironically, it's the creation of the old-fashioned house call. Think about how we all love that. The doctor's going to come.
I love it.
That's what we're doing, and that's the wonder of this. It's not cold, hard, technological, stuff. It's the warm embrace of the physician, mediated by technology.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. And also, Gil, actually, to add to that, to add to what you were saying, and John around data. Actually, John, you said something really interesting the other day on Twitter. I think you were quoting something that you were part of, an event that you were part of.
I was quoting Gil on Twitter, which is
John all the time. That's how we get attention. Or you, Bianca.
You said that we're going to move from control to collaboration, and I think that is really important because as long as I've been in digital health, which has been 10 years, we've been talking about the patient centrality. Those have been the buzzwords. Patient centrality. Patients are going to control. They will control their data. This is all patient driven. But in reality, that doesn't really match up with the legal side. It really doesn't. It's a bit of a legal fallacy in a sense. So the idea, the notion of collaboration, I think that's really where we need to be going, and focusing our efforts on and talking in those terms. That's just my 2 cents on that topic of data and control. I think it's a really big one and important one.
Yeah, that's a topic that both John and I and we all agree with, that the historic model, and John talked about this, we can also quote John, that culture, culture will trump innovation. And the historic culture of medicine has been sort of the persona. I'll be gender specific right now. The man in the white coat.
Completely.
Right, the man in the white coat who attains some form of regal supremacy. Where I disagree with Eric. I agreed with him at the time. I love the book, and John uses this word about the consumer. Whenever a market all of a sudden reflects the need of the consumer as opposed to consumerism. We have a healthcare system that is built around consumption, not necessarily around service. And it's moving in that direction. COVID is probably helping us move there faster. But this concept of collaboration, what's happened, I think, before our very eyes, is that the payer, this dynamic or this tension between the system and the payer and the policymaker with, in this nation, CMS, Part B, Part D, who pays for what, Medicare, Medicaid, Medicaid supplemental, all of this dynamic is more and more pulling the economics away from the doctor. And so suddenly the systems are moving from the historic post-World War II fee-for-service model in this nation. And keep in mind, we've got more than 300 million people here. It might be a very fragmented nation, but it's a big place, a lot of people, a lot of money. So you have suddenly a system that says we can't afford doctors charging whatever they want and payers paying X percentage of that. When I grew up in the system, maybe John remembers this, you submitted a bill to your insurance company, they paid you for 80% of the, you covered 20%, and it seemed to work. It was an easy system. Whatever the doctor billed, they paid 80%, you paid 20%, and then maybe you did pay the 20% or maybe you didn't, depending on the connection to the doctor. And that changed legally about co-pays and so forth. And suddenly what we see happening is we're moving to systems like Singapore, since you're speaking to us right now from Melbourne, I believe. Was that Sydney or Melbourne?
Melbourne, Australia. That's right.
Melbourne, Australia. I worked for the Australian government for 3 years. I don't know if I told you that. But yes, Canberra. Loved it. But in any event, what we're seeing is our system is morphing slowly. COVID will probably morph the system, but this concept of collaboration and consumerism is critical. The person who has the health concern, who has the most skin in the game ultimately, which is like us, we're the furthest from that table of decision makers. I mean, think about it. I mean, you're in this nation, you're battling the system for your access to care, to see a doctor. You know, whoever thought of you think of the patient will see you now. This system isn't built around us. Who thinks of waiting pre-COVID in a waiting room for 90 minutes to see a doctor for 8 minutes? I mean, that's not customer service. If your dry cleaner said to you, I'll get your dry cleaning, please sit here, and you waited an hour for your iron blouses and shirts, you'd go to a different dry cleaner. So the system is not based around us. And where you, Bianca, play such a critical role, and people like John or Eric Topol or others that are on your list of people to speak to, I'm just grateful to squeak onto it. We have to push the system to recognize that we're not inviting the patient to the table. They own the table. They own the table. And they've got to push the envelope on the use of these technologies and politely, diplomatically force the system to recognize that the data are available to help them as consumers live healthier, longer, sustainable lives. And until the consumer starts to embrace these apps and these wearables and starts to understand what the data mean in terms of their own survival, they will be at the, I think they will be at the beck and call of a system, not a doctor, not a payer, not a provider, not a policymaker. The person with a health concern is actually wandering in this fragmented ecosystem with no diplomatic voice to give them clout, except for you, Bianca. That's your job.
That's what I'm working on, definitely.
Can I riff on this control bit a little bit? You know, we talk about the shift from control to collaboration, which I think is a fundamental dynamic in many aspects of life. Buying a car, you know, we want to be able to control the pricing structure so we can see what the manufacturer's costs are, so I can see how much money the dealer is making. Again, that level of transparency is important, and that's everywhere. But here's the question, okay? What is the value of the stethoscope today? We talked about this stethoscope a patient uses, right? The stethoscope is a prototypical prayer shawl that is placed over the physician's shoulders to identify their authority. That's the value of the stethoscope, number one. Remember, it hasn't changed since Laennec, almost 150, 200 years. Number two, when we talk about to control to collaboration, who is, what is, how do we define collaboration? A lot of people talk about it as in the context of consumer centricity, in the context of physician patients working together to optimize their care path forward, right? Here's what I believe is ultimately what collaboration means. It's recognizing that the physician, and I get yelled at about this all the time, but I'm going to say it anyway, the physician is no longer the smartest person in the room. That fundamental realization is going to change things. Now, you could argue that the collective intelligence of advocacy groups or parents whose kids have cancer is smarter than the physician. I'll give you that. That's a reality that I talked about 7, 8, 10 years ago. But the reality is the computer is the smartest tool in the room. And our ability as humans to assimilate the information that's coming at us, whether it be clinical trials, drug development, all this stuff, it's impossible. We cannot, even the best clinician cannot keep track of all the trials, all the studies, all the papers, all the fundamental nuanced patient needs. So what's going to happen is that dynamic is going to shift. The cognitive heavy lifting will be done by technology. That's the collaboration that will be truly transformative. Now that's going to freak physicians out. We know it. When the nurse is in the room or the tech is in the room or the EKG technician is in the room, they chat with the patient and it's a social engagement. Everybody's happy. When the chief of medicine or the doctor or the cardiologist walks into that patient's room, everyone stands straighter. Everyone pays attention and looks to the physician for the cue. That's crap. I mean, that hegemony, that pecking order is going to be compromised. So go ahead, Gil.
Stay with that for a second, because when that chief resident or that chair of the department walks in, one of the reasons they got there, that person achieved that title. I'm staying with you. I'm sort of agreeing 85% of what you said.
Yep.
When that person walks in, or like to say you walk into a room.
Gil, I agree with it 75%. So I'm pushing it out there contextually because I think it's interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, but I think you're touching on something, which is that when that person walks into the room, the reason they're so important is that they represent composite knowledge. So when that chief of surgery or chief of orthopedics or chief of cardiology walks into the room, and the residents or the other cardiologists look and say, oh, so-and-so has now arrived, and they stand up in awe. They're not standing up in awe for the title. They're generally standing up in awe of the knowledge. I think so, because the great cardiologists that I know, like the Valentin Fusters of the world, their capacity to retain and deploy information in their heads is phenomenal. So what I want to get to, where I agree with, is artificial intelligence, machine learning, whatever you want to call it, technology. It is essentially composite wisdom at your fingertips. And what we haven't, to your point about culture trumping innovation, what we haven't acclimated to yet is we're still respecting the wise person who walks into the room. It's just that now that person's knowledge is being like aggregated. It's not their 30 or 40 years of wisdom and the retention of that wisdom applied. It's thousands of years in a short span of time of thousands or hundreds of thousands of patients aggregated. And I think the big limiting factor is that doctors haven't figured out how they culturally have to interact with that technology. And that, and ultimately they're still powerful. What they can do is
Gil, that's the word, right? It's not about their collective wisdom. That is part of the equation. But let's go into the political domain now. And I'm going to take all the labels off, and I'm not going to say anything specific. But one group feels that they've been disadvantaged by another group in a social context. Okay? It's not because that group is smarter. It's because that group has power. And I believe that when you talk about the chief of cardiology or the chief of medicine, they have wisdom, but they also have power. And that power makes careers. The people you mentioned, the Eugene Brunwells of the world, you know, the Sonnenblicks, these great clinicians who are masterful clinicians, are also power brokers, because they're going to help decide if that medical student gets a residency, who's going to get the fellowship at the Brigham or wherever. And that's such a complex dynamic for me. But I think that's real interesting. The other thing is, and you touched on this, really, and this is perfect, because if I'm the chief of cardiology, okay, I'm a 60-year-old chief of cardiology, and I look down my nose, right, through the pecking order, and I go to the intern, or maybe I even go to the medical student, right, because I'm feeling particularly vicious today. And I ask the medical student, what are the 5 reasons for ST segment elevation on an EKG? I would expect that student at best to be able to say what they are, maybe pick off 1 or 2, but know them viscerally, to articulate them spontaneously. If the student looked to their smartphone for that information, they would be chastised, right? They would say, what are you doing? You're looking it up? But there it is. There's the duality that technology is our partner in cognitive capability. So I see this as a big mishmash, right? It's gonna work its way out.
I want to connect what you said to Bianca's question, because if we look at the chair of cardiology or oncology, they, if you look at their average age range when they became physicians, they were physicians in the pre-iPad, pre-smartphone era.
It's digital, the digital native, right? That's where it's going to go.
Right. And so what happened was, all information available had to be retained information for you to be a great clinician. Now, I think what you're touching on, which is frightening, but we have to come acquainted with it. I think that the great physician will have great art and skill, and believe it or not, they'll have the ability to relate to people, both within their system and the people in their room, but they'll also be, in a form, expert research librarians who are able to access this. In 1995, I was at the very first TED-Med meeting in Charleston, South Carolina. And one of the other people who was there was the then Surgeon General, a man with a very unusual Chick, yes. Not Caesar Coop. And he said, "Hi, I'm Chick Coop." And he said something that I remember, and I'd love to see if someone could find out where we are today. He said, in 1 year, a noted physician is 10 years behind in their critical reading. Now, in 1995, we were at the dawn of what I wrote about. Bianca, asked me when I entered into the field of digital health. It was in 1995. Now, there was no smartphone. I had a cell phone. It was like an Army walkie-talkie. And I did have a email address. I was consulting with a company called The Greenhouse, later to be known as America Online. And the reality is, doctors had to sit there at night with a stack of magazines and flip through those critical things. Who could do that and stay current? Now, the ability to aggregate that which is important to you and get it fed to you and go through that is possible. I think the great physicians of today, not tomorrow, today they have mastery of skill and knowledge, they have pattern recognition skills, and they're research librarians, to your point. They understand, to the point you made earlier, data trumps. Data trumps all, but culture trumps innovation. They have to create, the great doctors have to create a culture where picking this up to look is much better than not.
Yes.
Well, look at C. Michael Gibson on Twitter as an example. Harvard professor, a brilliant scholar. Actually, a lot of people don't know this. He's an amazing painter. And he has, 600, 700,000 followers on Twitter. And he uses the tool extraordinarily well in the dissemination of data. I know sometimes, Bianca, you would get nervous if you put your regulatory hat on or your legal hat on, because when he's at conventions or he's pushing data out into the mainstream, and this is data on factor 10x, anti-platelet agent by Johnson & Johnson, Xarelto. I mean, this is a big company with a big budget, with a big legal staff, but C. Michael Gibson navigates that and very effectively uses technology in the form of social media and Twitter. And you know what? The thing is, and Gil, it's about the data. It's be able to learn. But when you look at Google as sort of the prototypical search engine, if I need something, I Google it, right? But Google gives you a vast information that is temporally disconnected. So I get this data dump. The interesting thing about Twitter and what Mike Gibson does is it tells you what's happening now. Twitter is actually a search engine because I could type in Xarelto, or I can hashtag digital health, and I'll see what Eric Topol is talking about now, not 6 years ago when he wrote that book. So it's that kind of stuff. And Alvin Toffler said it best, and I'll paraphrase it. It's not about learning new. It's not about learning new. Everybody says we need to learn new modalities. We need to embrace and adopt telemedicine. The trick is to unlearn and relearn. Unlearn and relearn. We have to change that pattern. We talk about pattern recognition. I see medicine as a pattern. And the pattern is that they think they're in the groove until someone like Elon Musk comes along and looks down into that groove and says, hey, buddy, you're in a rut. So it's not just the adoption. It's the complacency. It's the inertia. of where we are now and how can we unlearn it? So I think those are tricky things.
Absolutely. Such good points raised. Thank you very much. And I'm going to move to the next question, actually, which ties into the discussion that we've just had. So I'm interested in how concerns about machine-human symbiosis and also singularity can cause people and societies to push back against the idea of a digital health future. Some people are frankly scared of that idea. Others see digital health as a futuristic concept that is hard to imagine and perhaps an issue for later generations. And then you have those who see this revolution as improbable. So my question is, will there be a digital health revolution in our lifetime? And is this a good thing for humanity?
Gil, remember when Gil in the 70s, because we remember this, right? Remember the answering machine?
I do. I remember it very well.
Man, my mom, I mean, she would say, if it's important, they'll call back. Right? That defined the interface between the state of technology and humanity. If it's important, they'll call back. Now, go back now, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I think my mother was still alive. And what was the first tech? What was the first technology? First technology was fire. Fire allowed us to move. Fire allowed us to migrate. Fire allowed us to eat food and grow our brains because of protein consumption. But interestingly, today, fire is still essential to our lives, yet it is the #1 cause of property and personal damage. Lots of people die from fire every day in the world. So what we see is the duality of technology, is that there's always going to be a sense of wonder and fear, wonder and fear, wonder and fear. And that gets bigger with the bigger the technology is. So when you look at something like AI, which is friggin' crazy, right? That is the biggest thing to confront humanity, I think, ever. So it's going to have that inflection. It's going to have that sense of wonder and fear. And that's who we are now. And that balance, so for me, the revolution is coming, whether you like it or not. The toothpaste is out of the tube. It's not going back in. And the reality is that I think that it's the psychology of it that is something we have to talk about, not just the pragmatism of smart computers. It's the stethoscope around your neck. It's the psychopathology of this whole thing that I think is going to be important.
Yeah, John, I think that, this conversation, thanks to Bianca, is touching on the real critical points that innovators who wish to improve the human condition don't spend enough time on: culture, inertia, psychology of people's mindset and adopting change, law, economics. They're so focused. They're so focused on their idea, their insight, the elegance of what they're trying to do. They don't realize that they often, when they show me their plan and they say, and here are my competitors, and it's this other company and this other company in the space that are developing like technologies. And I often say, wait a minute, those are your allies. The health market, the digital health market, is so vast and huge that you're being a soloist with this idea. That's actually going to limit your road, your runway. That if those companies are equally successful along with you, and the system says, yeah, we got to do that, we got to find which one works for us, you're going to see faster traction. I don't think that the market looks at the market. No. The innovators look enough at the market, the psychology of the market, to build the future of the innovation. They look at their innovation as actually being a world of itself. Something you and I talk about a lot, which is
all the time,
the inside out as opposed to outside in. And it is so critical to do what Bianca's saying, this sort of singularity of getting people to adapt, to realize the revolution happened. They're just catching up to the revolution. So, in my opinion, why is COVID for a digital health standpoint, it's been the great accelerator, because the status quo wasn't working before COVID. It's just COVID exposed us to how much it wasn't working. And so the world of health, or accessing care in a COVID environment, has made us realize, well, I can't do what I did. I've got to do something different. And these things weren't invented the day after we were told to be socially distanced from one another, or physically different distance. Obviously, the three of us are speaking from three different locations. We're not socially distanced, we're physically distanced. But what happened was technology—
But we're intellectually aligned. We're intellectually aligned. There is no distance, zero distance. Right?
With you, brother, we're always old, right? We're always connected. But I think that this conversation we're having right now is the subject, Bianca, of a separate conversation, which is the psychology that helps us. And I give this example, that is hard for people to come to grips with. If we're happy and someone says, hey, would you like to go and have a piece of chocolate cake? People would say, sure, like, I'd love to have a piece of chocolate cake. There seems to be no inhibition to do that which makes us happy, that doesn't make us frightened. But if someone said to you, on the basis of many chocolate cakes, hey, you want to have a heart attack? You'd say, hell no, right? No way. And that's the aspect of how our feelings about something influence our decision and outtake something.
Yeah.
So when we're happy, we're happy to do it. When we're fearful, we don't want to do it. What's happening? Digital health is frightening. I don't want to do it.
Well, it's been said a long time ago that a rising electron lifts all computers. And I think we will see that. But here's, Gil, you know this, having probably launched a few antibiotics in your day.
A few.
Physicians don't want new. What they want is the same, but better. For example, I want a new cephalosporin with an expanded spectrum or an improved safety profile. I don't want a osmium-based reciprocal back-bonded antibiotic. I don't even know what that is. I'm not going to use it. And what we're seeing now is that shift from something new. You mean give my patient a stethoscope? You mean have a new partner in my group practice that is a computer, that we round with a computer? So again, and patients are the same way. They want the same, do you want a nuclear powered oven? No, you want an oven that maybe cooks faster, a conventional gas or electric oven. It's the same, but better. And that's the problem that I see, is that the psychology of adoption. And there's one other thing I want to touch on, because I don't want to forget it. And Bianca, this really it puts you at the center of the discussion, which I think is really important. What we're seeing is this discussion of exponential change, right? When CEOs were asked what's their greatest advantage, you know what they said? And this is Harvard Business School, this isn't me. They said speed. We're agile, we can change, we can move. Then they asked the same group of CEOs what keeps them up at night. And they said speed. So again, there it is. There's the duality of wonder, it's fast, fear, it's too fast. Now, here's the point. When we look at new ideas coming to the marketplace, innovators are fast. They come up with a great idea, okay? But then they get to this center, this middle road of legal and regulatory issues that slow the process down. And I think that's where your sweet spot is, to help facilitate this. The issue is not because it gets to market faster, is because some smarty pants is going to beat you. And what I'll talk about is the continuous blood glucose monitoring devices that people put on their arm, right? Those are cool. Those are considered state of the art. But interestingly, little companies like Profusa and innovators who have already trumped that, who have already jumped over that, who are looming to market really quickly. So it's oftentimes less about the innovation, but the time to market, the speed to market, the hurdles to market. And that changes things, because if you're a big pharma company and you have a slow, legal, complacent, guarded process that takes 2 years, by the time your brilliant product comes to market, someone else is going to have another one that's better. So,
yeah. John, I don't know, I'm going to put a question mark next to that one. So it's a yes and no moment because, often because the market is hesitant about the new, to your point, just like the antibiotic, the new this, the new agent. What sometimes happens is second to the market has a unique advantage that the first to the market had to do the heavy the market. And then they come in with the from a marketing standpoint, the differentiating voice and a market that's about, and people say, oh, another one, that's pretty mission critical. I'm going to sort of jump on that and go for it. And I think a great example of that would be in the area of PD-1 therapies with cancer. This duality between Bristol Myers Squibb and Merck on their PD-1 approaches, a lot of same indications, but hey, you can see number 2 to the market has done quite well. And what did Bristol Myers Squibb do? They came out with like a better PD-1 and number 3 to the market, and the two companies are trading off. So it's that's why I think we have to your point about collaboration. I take a card from Barry Nailbuff and Andon Brandenburg's book, Co-opetition, written also in the 90s. Great book, still worthwhile reading. I think companies see themselves as competitors. I think in the area of health, they have to see themselves as complementers. I think that when one therapy in a category, people say, I don't know. But when they're like statins to reduce cholesterol, when there's 6 statins in the marketplace, it became a multi-billion-dollar industry of people looking at which one was slightly better or slightly better for this patient. So I don't think we're looking in health as so much as competition and first in, but I think to your point, I think the big opportunity for health companies right now is in a COVID-19 environment, which brings us together. I think what we're finding is companies are breaking down the walls, and you'll see a Pfizer working with other companies, a Moderna working with other companies, a J&J working with other companies. I think what's hurt the pharmaceutical industry, the biopharmaceutical industry, is it's been secretive. We don't understand how its model of pricing works. I wrote about this in 1994 or 5. They had a hands-off approach to the consumer. They still have a hands-off approach to the consumer for the most part. I don't think they see the consumer as a customer. I see that they think the physician or the payer is the customer and the consumer is downstream. They're the push me, pull you. I think that I would love to see in the singularity of this, we realize that we have multiple customers here, and each one has to be treated as an equal partner in the success of our world's health. And until we sort of like tier them, as long as we tier them, we're not going to get the full advantage of innovation. It's going to take longer to get through the system and be applied.
Sure. Well, look at in January, just a quick point. In January, ask well-schooled, knowledgeable folks how long it takes to develop a vaccine. And what would they say? 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, right? Now look at where we are, months. And what I think we need is an element of legal and regulatory agility that doesn't compromise process, but redefines process.
Yes.
Agreed.
I agree, 100%. That's really been the focus of what I've been doing the last few years, focusing in on
Keep doing it, please.
Yeah, I'm trying. And going to that point of speed, if we look at the opportunity that we have now with COVID, yes, COVID could be this great accelerator, but if we look at the regulatory environment, are we in a position to enable digital health to accelerate any better than we have been in the past 10 years? And if we look at the laws now, GDPR, HIPAA's been around for a while, but we have so many regulatory roadblocks. HIPAA, the current COVID crisis has enabled us to see what it could be like if we lift some of those restrictions. I think it's a really, really interesting and important time for people to start looking at the legal side as well. I'm going to go to the next question. That's okay. This links in with this one. MIT AI expert Lex Friedman has called Elon Musk a first principles thinker. He said that revolutionary ideas happen when you return to the fundamentals and ask, is there a better way? I agree with this statement and the reasoning and the importance of reasoning from first principles in the field of digital health, which is the focus of my work. And in following your work in this field for many years, I've always seen you as being first principles thinkers who challenge conventional wisdom. My question is, what can digital health companies learn from Elon Musk and other first principle thinkers like yourselves in terms of pushing the status quo and fostering cultures that will help the innovation succeed to market? John, could you get us started?
That's a question for, I want to hear John's answer on this one, definitely.
I think that you know, Elon talks a lot about first principles, and somehow that's become sexy, you know? I mean, ultimately, you know, the number 100 is 4 times 25. 4 is 2 squared. 25 is 5 squared. 100 equals 2 squared times 5 squared. I mean, ultimately, that tells me that it's made of 2s and 5s. It's a tool. It's a tactic. I don't think it's a guiding principle. I don't think it's a philosophical construct. It's a very basic mathematical tool. So, you know, when I position a brand, and Gil and I have had this conversation probably a million times, I cite Volvo, right? What does Volvo stand for? What do they own? They own safety, right? Some iteration of it, but they own one word. And they get it down to its fundamentals, right? So that is, in essence, first principles, that I want a car that is safe. You know, interestingly, people who buy Volvos don't pick the car. Volvo picked them by positioning themselves that way. So I think first principles is motherhood and apple pie in many ways. You know, I think it's a good tactic, but it's not a guiding philosophy. Now, here's the thing about Elon Musk. Elon Musk comes from the bully school, and I mean that in quotes with affection. He's aggressive. He knows what he wants, and he goes and he gets it. And clearly, I mean, if any of Elon Musk's innovations were his only innovation, he'd be famous. PayPal, right? Tesla, the Boring Company, SpaceX, Neuralink. All these are in of themselves great. But his style is not necessarily definitive. So let's not be too quick to embrace Elon Musk as the definitive innovator, particularly in healthcare. Now, what did Elon Musk name his car company after? Who? He named it after Nikola Tesla. Tesla, okay? Tesla was not a bully. Tesla was a fragile, broken man. And the ideas from Tesla were not big and bold. In fact, they were whispers. And Nikola Tesla, was beaten up by Thomas Edison. I mean, viciously attacked. Also by VCs. It's the same thing today. It's exactly the same thing today. Nikola Tesla was a fragile voice, a whisper of innovation that fortunately caught on. But many of his innovations didn't make it. So for me, what I like about the Elon Musk model is that it is important and good. And we all know that innovators like to yell and stomp their foot and say, my idea is great. But particularly in healthcare, here's the point. In healthcare, voices are fragile. With kids with cystic fibrosis, with moms who have children with cancer, they're not Elon Musk. They're Nikola Tesla. They're fragile voices who are brilliant, but complicated by, and there we go back to that word, the underlying psychology of that reality. So number one, I think that you know, Elon Musk is an engineer, right? So he's going back to these first principles as a tactic. He's factoring the numbers. He's taking 100 and factoring into 2 squared times 5 squared. And I think that's good, but I don't think that's going to give us a philosophical or even a interesting perspective on innovation. It's not, that's the first step. But once you see those first principles, is how can I advance them? And that's where the magic happens. So first principles is a methodological consideration. A lot of people can do it. It's what you do with that information when you find it.
John, you really define this so well. And I just want to pick up on something that you said, that this bully principle, because we see fundamental change in these words. Again, you're talking about the culture, the psyche, psychodynamic personality of Elon Musk.
Yeah.
So it touches a theme that we've touched on again and again in this conversation. Bianca's chosen these questions very well. One is his ability, Elon Musk's ability to grab you by the throat and get your attention is, he's a power broker when it comes to money. And so look, money talks, the system talks, and Elon Musk is an enterprise. He's the Rockefeller, he is the Edison, he's the Henry Ford of our time. And so he has this humongous financial and socio-political clout. You could say that's the Musk bully principle, right?
Yeah.
But it's really the same thing that Henry Ford used, Henry Edison, Thomas Edison used, the Rockefellers used, the Carnegies used. They used the same thing, right? They wielded their economic muscle to get stuff done, good or bad. Elon Musk also has the ability to do that, but he has something that I think is critical that we have to look at in terms of his first principle: operationalize. SpaceX is a classic example of privatization of space operationalized. Tesla is an interesting idea, but I think we've got to take a look at what he's doing right now to understand the power of Elon Musk in the future, because we always thought of space exploration or even going into space as a government-backed enterprise. That was the domain of NASA. And this other aspect you talked about, which is collaboration. His level of power of voice is so high that he's able to weave in the government to collaborate with him. It's like he is a government or a society that sits on top of society, much like Henry Ford did at the event of the Model T and beyond. He's doing that now. But I want to bring this back to health for a moment. What we can learn as consumers of the health system, and something that you and I certainly remember well. We championed their journey, the call to action, and that was the HIV AIDS community that were so involved in the late 80s and 90s, particularly. A community of people who became patients, who had a community of caregivers surrounding them that created this disruptive voice. They did not accept the status quo. They did not accept the psychology of the pharmaceutical system to say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to go to the regulatory system, we're going to do that. They chained themselves to the gates. They developed an intelligence operation, all of that. And it is, to my understanding, it's never been replicated since. It's been referred to often and never replicated. So if we look at COVID, what happened with COVID is governments and society replicated in a way the AIDS movement. We don't like the status quo. Give us a vaccine in 8 months, 9 months, okay, a year, but not 3 years. We won't tolerate that now. And we're not chaining ourselves to the gates. We're chaining the doors to the mall closed. We're chaining the entranceway to the movie theaters. We're closing restaurants. We're closing down our lifestyle. That's the chaining to the gates of this generation with COVID. Elon Musk teaches us something, which is push hard against the system to get what you want. And I think there is something to learn here for all of us. I would say parents who have a child better look at that behavior pattern and say, my being polite and trying to work through the system nicely or get their empathy for me, it's not good enough. I think that people have to unite. And I think you talked about this before, the digital world, what it's teaching us is And I wrote about in 1995 in my paper, patients online. First of all, nobody knew what online meant in 1995. I had this concept that the World Wide Web would begin to unite patients, and that what I saw was having a disease, a common condition, was a powerful unifying factor, even more important than your home economics. I think that the acceptance of digital health and digital technologies could bring great power to communities of people who share a diagnosis. And what I hope they learn from the COVID-19 era is when you are separated, you lose your Elon Musk effect. That's that power of game-changing voice. I think we can take that away from Elon Musk, most certainly.
Wonderful. This goes to another question connected to Elon Musk. Will Neuralink be the technology that will precipitate the digital health revolution? John, do you want to start that? That one?
Yeah, yes and no. We are already connected with our computers. We just use our arm as the connection. But I think that ultimately we will question the basis of a carbon-based life to the transfer to a silicon-based life. And I use that word rather specifically. So it's inevitable. The interesting thing for me is when we talk about neural lace and the computer-brain interface, everybody freaks out. Oh my God, what is this? And interestingly, the cochlear implant, which is an early type of neural interface, is 50 years old. It's been around for 50 years. And look at deep brain stimulation, which is much more of an invasive procedure than stimulating a single nerve behind your ear. That's over 30 years old. So we've been doing neural stimulation, and even we're actually reading the devices out of the brain too in neural stimulation for Parkinson's and movement disorder. So I don't think that it's freaky. It's here. And I think it's a natural extension of that technology.
But it's not mainstream. And, I think that a great guest, Bianca, that John and I know well, we respect well, is Jane Metcalf, who is the founding editor of Wired. She's just come out with a book called Neo-Life. I have 2 copies. It's a great book. She certainly is a guest to be considered on this topic specifically. John is spot on. I mean, people who have really pressing health concerns like, difficult Parkinson's disease or epilepsy or other conditions, the concept of implantables or neuroimplantables, that's a given for them. The ability to control Parkinson's disease using a smartphone and saying, I need to walk or I need to do that. Now, neuroimplantables are doing that for us already. I think that will we have neuroimplantables for just basic diagnosis or monitoring of our body functions? I think that's a long way in the future. But I think that you're going to see the moment people have a critical and chronic health urgency and they think a neuroimplantable is going to improve their quality of life, boom, you're going to see great companies like Medtronic, already trying to figure this out and come up with ideas and push forward, sort of brilliant concepts to the table. Because where there's urgency and defined need, you're going to find digital health innovators right behind those communities.
But I think that just as we had the advancement of land and countries in the context of manifest destiny, we have a physiologic manifest destiny. This is our domain. And that if anyone believes that the construct of reality that lives in our world now is somehow definitive, they're fooling themselves. My dog smells 50 times greater than I do. Why should my dog have this advanced sensory awareness? We see only a very small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, granted, there are problems. You can't see the whole thing. But I believe that even sound, sound is a function of air vibration. Okay, we vibrate the air, It goes in our ear. What happens if we create the sound electronically? We transfer the sound electronically, not mediated by sound, and we create a whole domain of music. So to me, this is about making us more human, expanding our awareness to a broader reality that is right now very narrow and very meager. So I'm optimistic. I understand that is a dystopian concept to many people. But I think that, you know, to be able to fix our vision, to be able to see 2010 instead of 2040, you know, better than 2020, leveraging LASIK surgery is just expanding our sensory awareness. It's here, it's there. Tiger Woods is a great golfer because he overcorrected his vision to have superhuman vision. Well, there you have it. Why can't we have superhuman senses mediated by technology?
We probably, in some respects, John, you know, we don't know the human physiological, you know, sort of setup 1,000, 2,000 years ago. But I'd like to believe that, you know, cave people, most certainly to survive, had to have extraordinary sensory perception to understand risk and danger. You know, it could be that our world, our sensory world, is getting smaller as we feel that we have external ability, obviously technology. And also we don't feel threatened. You know, an animal, dog or your cat. I used to be amazed. My dog would run to the window and look out the window, and I'd run to the window and say, "What is the dog looking at?" And I couldn't see anything. And like 3 minutes later, a car would drive up the street, or a person with a dog would be walking in front of my house 3 minutes later. How does a dog sense that? We probably, as creatures, sensed these things thousands of years ago and lost that ability, lost the ability.
Our brain is malleable. Our brain can change as a function of the sensory input. People can use clicking sounds to echolocate. So blind people can walk through a room by clicking and listen to the sound because their brain is retrained. We see this time and time again with brain injuries. So I think our brain is the tool that is waiting for expanded and enhanced sensory input to help evolve and transform the human experience.
You know, it's interesting. We talked about, you know, sort of like companies, and there are amazing companies out there that are at the frontier of reconnecting us to our sensory possibilities, or giving us the gift of sensory ability that we don't have. One of those examples, I think, you know, I tried it on as a picture of me on Twitter. Orcam makes glasses that enable blind people to have a form of sight capacity. It's amazing. And I tried the new one on. It not only has sight capacity, I without my glasses at this stage of my life, things are very blurry. I put their glasses on and picked up a book. It read the book to me, and when I got to the end of the page, it stops so I can turn the page. The digital health and digital technologies are going to give us a full range of sensory perception, whether it's implantables or wearables. We're entering a golden age of possibility, but it's built really on, I think, what John was talking about earlier, our desire to participate in community and culture. And that culture can be actually a very positive force in advancing people's lives. And it can actually put shall we say, pump the brakes on innovation at the same time.
Yes, definitely. It's so exciting to think what's up ahead in the field of digital health. This brings me to the next question, which is addressing a bit of a problem that we have already talked about, but we'll go into it a little bit more. So technology opens up the world and connects us all. We can socialize and complete business from our living rooms, yet I'm not permitted to call a doctor at Harvard Medical School or another hospital for advice. The law will not permit me to do that from my living room in Melbourne, Australia to the US. The law does not allow us to spread our digital health wings and fly. And until now, the law has joined several other fields, in my opinion, in delaying the progress of digital health I know that's a contentious point. This pandemic has given us a potential new pathway forward for legal regulation post-pandemic. My question is, let's say hypothetically, and this is what I think is very possible, that let's say the law will not precipitate the societal and behavioral changes that we need for digital health to succeed. Could branding, marketing, and communications lead the cultural changes ahead of the lawmakers? Gil, would you like to begin?
Absolutely yes! Exclamation point. Brands really are an expression of our aspirations, and brands, time and time again, have created cultural revolutions. Obviously, staying in the world of technology and health, in 1994, when Apple, or 84, when Apple introduced itself with that revolutionary commercial of the people just sort of paying homage to the DOS ruler, and ran in and destroyed the screen. It created a revolution about the friendly computer, and changed our mindset. But I think that you're dealing with a much more difficult question, which is the system. Can brands push the envelope of the system? And I just wrote about this, that just the other day, on Monday, I posted a piece on this topic where I think that brands specifically, and I'm going to deal with health brands most specifically, now need to not push the envelope on the law, but they need to push the envelope on the relationship between the healing brand and the consumer. And I want to use that word specifically, the consumer or the customer. In health, I really believe right now that the system is the customer. And that's why the regulatory system plays such a dominant role here, because it's the system, it's regulating the system of how we communicate with each other. And as long as consumers are held back at arm's length, I actually think the system is disadvantaged. Yeah. And I think that we don't take full responsibility for our health because there are intermediaries we've grown accustomed, enculturated to make sure the doctor's representing us or the pharmacist is representing us. If your life was on the line, heaven forbid, I would highly recommend take the system by the scruff of the neck and shake it around a little bit. Because if you're waiting for the system to save your life, you're going to be in trouble. So I think that, Bianca, you and your vision is the future. You're not only guiding thought leaders and stimulating important conversation. I would urge you to raise your voice about how law and policy and innovation have to find a place of harmony for the sake, not of the system, for the sake of the people the system seeks to represent. You and me and John and our families and our friends and our communities, unless people are invited to the table as full participants and the system makes that work, we're going to continue to see preventable disease on the rise, non-communicable diseases on the rise. And non-communicable diseases, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, respiratory disease, mental illness, result in 79% of the deaths. Why? When we have so many amazing therapies that were built as products of respect for science, why? Brands now have to take on the newest challenge. They must align.
The American thinker Deming helped transform the Japanese economy by optimizing process. And I think that's what we have to look at here, that process is part of the innovation strategy in of itself. Legal and regulatory bounds have to be examined in through a magnifying glass of innovation and creativity. We often defer creativity to the innovator or to the creative people at the advertising agency and expect legal and regulatory to be, well, that's what they do. And in fact, that is an area for creativity that is powerfully transformative.
Wow, thank you so much. What a wonderful discussion that was. What an incredible opportunity to sit down and chat with you. And I just thank you so much for your time today. And
my pleasure.
I look forward to continuing this discussion.
We'd love to. And always great to see you, Bianca and John.
Lovely to see you.
Gil?
John, it was a usual love fest today. We'll have to invite it back. Questions we disagree on.
Bianca, we're looking to you to help drive change. Just keep that in mind, that the burden falls on all of our shoulders. But I think what you're doing is important and is truly transformative and kind of new. You know, so let's transform process and drive change throughout the world. Thank you.
Let's do it. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.